here's the here's the item I picked up. This is recent history, 1994. It's a military political cover. So I'm going to try to explain what these various things are here. The United Nations Protection Force, Operation Provide Promise, and Operation Able Sentry. And then we'll look more closely at the map, and I'll go over the situation in 1994, this was in the midst of the breakup of Yugoslavia. The United Nations Protection Force. I'm going to read you something here that I got from the internet, the military report. The United Nations Protection Force, or UNPRO-4, as they like to have these acronyms, was the largest, most expensive, and most complex peace operation in the history of the United Nations. The former Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia is the most southern of the 6 former republics. It declared its independence in late 1991, when ethnic armed conflict broke out in the other 5 Yugoslav states. And by the way, I think that's not quite accurate. They should say the other 4, because Slovenia also departed Yugoslavia without any significant ethnic or armed conflict. The Macedonian president Gligorov and the United Nations became concerned that spillover fighting from the warring factions to the north, that would be in Serbia, Croatia, would move into Macedonia. The president of Macedonia conveyed to the Secretary General a request for the deployment of United Nations observers in Macedonia in view of his concern about the possible impact on it of fighting elsewhere in former Yugoslavia. So that's how United Nations Protection Force got involved in Yugoslavia at the request of Macedonia when this interethnic fighting started. Operation Provide Promise was a particular program involving the airlifting of aid to populations in Bosnia-Herzegovina. This wasn't actually armed conflict, although it was what they call humanitarian assistance in a non-permissive environment. In other words, there was fighting going on, and the planes that were doing the airlifts were at risk of some kind of military involvement, although in fact, none of them were shot down, and there was no loss of life or anything like that. Operation Able Sentry. What happened at the request of Macedonia was the United Nations Protection Force set up a program, the United Nations Preventive Deployment Force, UNPREDEP. That was the program that they put in place to meet the request of Macedonia, established in 1993, to monitor and report activity along the border with Serbia, which could undermine the confidence and stability of Macedonia. Operation Able Sentry was a task force of the US military that took part in this prevention force. So what we have here is a cover sent via the Air Force Postal Service. By the way, here's the back of the cover. You see Air Force Postal Service and what looks like a California zip code, 09821. So it took 10 days for it to get from, and this, by the way, the headquarters of this operation was in Skopje, Macedonia, the capital. Here's a close-up of the map. It gets a little fuzzy when you blow it up like this, but yeah, I thought I'd go over this and make some comments about the different areas. In 1994, several of the republics of Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, had already broken away. Slovenia was the first in June of 1991, and that went relatively peacefully. Macedonia came quickly thereafter, September of 1991. And by the way, the name was finally changed to the Republic of North Macedonia in 2019. It took all that time for them to negotiate an agreement with the Greeks, who refused to recognize the country because they didn't like the name. I've talked about that before, so I won't repeat myself. So you had Slovenia and Macedonia already departed. The other parts, Croatia, Bosnia, and Serbia, saw considerable fighting between the ethnic factions. Montenegro was an exception. And by the way, Montenegro has long been an exception in this area. It was the only part of this Balkan territory that was never conquered by the Turks. And it was recognized as an independent republic as early as 1878 at the council or conference in Berlin after the Russo-Turkish War. But it had been effectively independent all along. It was never conquered by the Turks. The territory is so rugged and mountainous, and the people are so fierce that the Turks just gave up on it. So there was no ethnic fighting in Montenegro, but it was the last of the republics to remain united with Serbia in what became known as the Federation of Yugoslavia, and then later the Federation of Serbia-Montenegro. And it finally became independent as a result of a referendum in 2006. Croatia, let's talk about Croatia. Croatia declared independence, that is, the central government declared independence in June of 1991, just about the same time as Slovenia did, but its attempt to become independent was thwarted by the fact that there were areas that refused to go along and that wished to remain part of Yugoslavia. So it became divided. There's an area in Croatia called the Krajina, which is largely populated by Serbs, and they wanted to remain with Serbia in Yugoslavia at that point. And so therefore, war ensued, and they were not able to successfully become an independent republic. The same thing in Bosnia. They declared independence in 1992, but quickly the different ethnic factions went to war. The Serbs, the Croats, and the Bosnians, and that didn't end until 1995 with the Dayton Accords. There were 6 republics in Yugoslavia: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, and the Serbia includes both this Vojvodina and Kosovo. At that time, it was all one country, so that accounts for these extra 2 territories. Montenegro and Macedonia make 6. So what about this place called Vojvodina? I'm not really sure why this border here is indicated with a strong line, because it was never independent of Serbia, at least not within this time period. Kosovo, as we know, did split off later, and so that's another story. But I can tell you a little bit about the history of Vojvodina. It's very complicated. Originally, the Vojvodina was a territory that extended up into Romania and what's now Hungary. It was created when the whole territory, all this area of Croatia, Slovenia, and this part of Serbia was part of the Austrian Empire. So the Austrians, they had a war with the Hungarians in 1848. Austria won, and they declared this to be an autonomous territory. It was incorporated into Hungary, not Serbia, but Hungary in 1860. And it was only later, as a result of World War I, that the territory became part of Serbia. Hungary was pretty much dismembered after World War I. The Austrians and Hungarians had a dual monarchy, and they lost the war, and the size of both Austria and Hungary was considerably reduced. A lot of what had been their territory went to Romania, to Serbia, and part to Czechoslovakia, of course. There are 6 official languages. It's now, Vojvodina is now a portion, it's a district of Serbia. And as you can imagine, the population is very mixed. They have 6 official languages: Croatian, Serbian, Slovak, Romanian, Hungarian, and something called Pannonian Rusin, Rusyn. I don't know what that is. Pannonia is a geographical term referring to the plain that forms most of Hungary. I think the name Pannonia was used by the Romans to refer to what we now call Hungary before it was invaded by the Magyars. So finally, Kosovo. Kosovo is sometimes known as Old Serbia. This is the territory where the famous Battle of Kosovo was fought with the Turks in 1389, when they acquired this territory and later moved up into the rest of what's now Serbia. Kosovo is populated primarily by ethnic Albanians, something like 80%. In the 20th century, 80% of the population is Albanian, only 20% Serbian. And they, as we know, they also had a war. The Kosovo Liberation Army favored separating from Serbia, and that finally took effect. Kosovo declared independence in 2008, but this was not recognized by Serbia. To this day, Serbia does not recognize Kosovo as a separate country. However, 100 other members of the UN do recognize it. This town in Montenegro, Titograd, needless to say, it's not called that anymore. It was named, in honor of Marshal Tito, the leader of Yugoslavia. It's now capital of Montenegro. It's Pogradec.